Hello and welcome to Modded Kerbal Space Program. This is Career Mode, and today we're going to be doing docking and rendezvous with Kerbin Station. We're going to be doing this with our Keryuz, which is a 3 Kerbal capsule, kind of Soyuz-inspired vessel. This is going to be another routine mission to the station, and it's going to have Jebediah, Bill, and Bob Kerman aboard. This is a mission they've done before. They've already landed on both the moon and Minmus multiple times by this point. So you can see here that we have the station ahead of us. So what we're going to do is we're going to time warp until the station is just above the launch pad. In fact, just a little bit before that. And then we're going to go ahead and type our launch script into KOS here. Now this launch is going to be completely automated using KOS. If you're interested in learning more about KOS, I strongly recommend you check out either the KOS docs or Cheers Kevin and his excellent tutorial taking you step by step, starting with a boot script all the way to fully automated launching, orbiting, circularization, transfer to the moon, and then even landing on the moon using KOS. Alright, so now that we've launched here, we're going to be launching into a 100-kilometer circular orbit around Kerbin. The station is in a 125-kilometer circular orbit around Kerbin, so we're going to be just 25 kilometers lower, which means that we're going to be moving a little bit faster than the station. Now this is intentional. Our goal is to let the station get a little bit ahead of us, and then we're going to catch up with it, so to speak, because we're lower than the station. Our altitude is lower, we're closer to Kerbin, we're actually experiencing a higher velocity. Now we see here that unfortunately we had to do a night launch. I would have preferred to launch this in the day, that way everybody could get a look at the blue sky and the nice pretty clouds, but because of this transfer we're kind of limited for time. I have other rockets launching soon, so I want to make sure to get this in between some of the other rocket launches, so we have to do a night launch. Apologies for that if it's a little dark, but it'll get better soon. And look at that, we get to experience the nice city lights of Kerbin. So we're getting up ready for stage separation. Stage 2 has lit. Stage 2 is just powered by a single humble Terrier engine. This doubles as both of our upper stage orbital insertion stage as well as our transfer rendezvous vehicle. This will be the only engine that this craft is going to ever use. The booster stage consisted of a single Kodiak engine and then 4 Vernier engines. So we're on ascent here. Okay, and we're coming up on our circularization burn. Now, as I said, this launch and orbital circularization is done completely using KOS. So once we achieve our apoapsis, the script then shuts the main engines off and coasts up to our apoapsis. And then once we get close to that, it's going to stop the time warp. It's going to automatically deploy the fairings, deploy the solar panels. Perfect. And now it's going to time warp us to our circularization burn, and then it's going to automatically complete that. So we don't have to touch the controls. We can just enjoy the nice view of Kerbin and the beautiful skybox. Had a nice view of Kerbal there. Now, as I said, in this video we're going to be focusing on a docking and a rendezvous. Now, I do not have a KOS script to automate rendezvous and docking. That is a goal for the future. But for right now, we're going to actually demonstrate how you would just do this manually. So the first thing we're going to do is add a maneuver node. And then we're going to add prograde until the projected apoapsis is about 125 kilometers. That puts us on the same orbital plane as the station. So then we're going to take a look at our closest intersect here, and we notice that it's about 20 kilometers or so. So then we want to try to time our burn, and in this case we're actually pushing it further into the future. See, we got a separation there of about 1.2 kilometers, but we're going to try to get that as close as we possibly can. And the goal here is just to continue to reduce the time step and the thrust step of this maneuver node. I'm even adding a little bit of normal, anti-normal there, just to kind of see if we can adjust it. We did launch into a equatorial orbit, the same as the station, but, there can be a little bit of deviation there, maybe a difference of maybe 0.1 degree. So we want to try to dial it in as close as possible, but the main way you're going to dial this in is using prograde. This is almost an entirely prograde burn. And then you also want to use the time. So change the increment of the time when you do this burn. Because we launched at a point where the station was just ahead of us, we have to wait that certain amount of time, and there's that just right sweet spot where we're going to raise our orbit and perfectly intersect with the station. So that's our goal here. So we saw that that burn was in about 3 minutes, so we're going to go ahead and warp to that maneuver, and then we're going to let the KOS script execute that node for us. We're just going to run our maneuver script. So we see that that has been executed. Now we're going to switch to approach info. Now we see that right now the intersect is about 505 kilometers, which is pretty good, but we could do even better. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to use our RCS thrusters just to tune this approach and get it even more dialed in. So our goal is to get that approach as low as possible to 0, as close as we can possibly get it to 0 meters. Usually you can tune this, but it depends on your approach. Sometimes you can get it really close down into the millimeters, other times you're not as successful. Here I was really only able to tune it about 40 or 50 meters or so. Then once you've gotten that dialed in as close as possible, you can just go ahead and time warp until you're about a minute before intersection. And the reason for this is you want to continue to dial it in. Now that we're close, we can really dial in the accuracy of this approach and this rendezvous. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to make sure that my nav ball is set to target. Then I'm going to point my ship retrograde relative to the target. And then I'm just going to burn my main engine. And you notice how much throttle I'm using there. I'm barely throttling up. It doesn't even quite hit the first notch there on the throttle bar. And then once we get it kind of close, we can just even lock it to retrograde. So the information that we want to focus on here is in the bottom left. Do we see that intersection going down, the distance going down, and do we see the time to intersect going up? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the ship around, and I'm going to actually face the target. So I'm not going to be using my main engine anymore for the rest of this rendezvous. And again, we're going to use our RCS thrusters to tune this, and you can see that I was able to adjust it and get it even closer. All the while, I'm continuing to incrementally reduce my relative velocity. Now we're down to about 2 meters per second. So now what I'm doing is switching over to the station using the bracket key, and I'm going to select the open docking port that I plan to dock to. I'm going to pin it. Then I'm going to switch back to the Keryuz. I'm going to time warp until I'm within about 200 meters or so, all the while continuing to dial in this approach even more. You might notice that what I'm doing there is on the nav ball. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to keep that prograde vector on the maneuver icon, that target icon. The reason I'm doing that is the prograde vector, it indicates where you're headed, where your ship is going. So if I can keep that prograde vector icon locked onto the maneuver target, or locked onto the target rather, then that allows me to make sure that my ship is pointed in exactly the right direction it needs to go. So now we're down somewhere around 1 meters per second of relative velocity, so we're moving pretty slowly. And we just want to time warp. We don't want to increase our speed. If you get impatient waiting for your vessel to close the distance, sometimes this final approach can take 10-15 minutes if your relative velocity is low enough. So in this situation, you just want to time warp. You don't want to increase your relative speed because that will make it even more difficult to dock. So you notice here, I just went ahead and switched my target over to the docking port itself, not just the station in general, but actually specifically set my target to the docking port, and that makes it so much easier to actually finish docking, because then you know exactly where you should be pointing your ship. In this case, it's really easy to dock because the docking port is actually oriented to the front of the ship. If it was on the side or the back, we would have to switch our control node. But in this case, we don't have to. Okay, so we're within about 30 meters of separation now. So we just want to continue to keep making sure that that prograde vector is locked on to the target icon. Now we're just going to orient our vessel so that our docking port is facing the exact same direction. And if you want to, you can even make sure the orientation is the same. This icon that I'm orienting my vessel to is provided by a mod called the Navball Docking Alignment Indicator. It's a really nifty little mod. All it does is add this one little icon when you're docking to your navball, and it makes it so much easier. You don't have to guess, you know exactly which direction the docking port is facing, so you can orient your vessel exactly to it. So now that we're really close, we're within about 10 meters here. Our relative velocity is quite low, but we want to reduce it even more. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to judge where the velocity is different from the station, and I'm trying to kill off as much of that relative velocity as possible. So we see I'm moving a little bit too close to the station there, so I'm going to fire away from the station to push me away. And again, I'm only using RCS thrusters here, and I'm using the JKIL keys on my keyboard to move up, down, and laterally. This gives me the opportunity to really dial this in, and I'm just barely pressing the keys. I'm not holding them down for extended durations. I'm just barely tapping the keys slightly to give me as much precision as possible. You're in a vacuum. There's no need to use a huge amount of fuel or thrust power. We could actually see there that I kind of came a little bit too far over from the station, so now I just have to correct, bring myself back the other direction. But really the key here is you just want to move as slowly as possible. There's no need to rush it. Once you get close to the station, just use little puffs of your RCS thrusters to move you closer. Once you get within about a meter or so, the magnetic docking ports should attract to each other, and it should pull you in for the final docking. Okay, and now we see that we're docked to the station, so we're just going to go ahead and open up our bay there, and we're going to turn off the reaction wheel torque on the vessel. It's a good idea to turn off as many redundant reaction wheels as you can on your station. We're also just going to transfer Jebediah, Bill, and Bob to the station here, where they'll be staying for the near future. We do have a space camp coming up. They're going to be bringing about 13 Kerbals to the station and going to be training them, and hopefully at the end of that space camp, some of those Kerbals will actually be joining our space program. We could definitely use some more Kerbals. We're starting to run a little bit low. We're planning to do some more Taurus missions using that Courier-class corvette that we demonstrated in the previous video. So stay tuned for the next video, where hopefully we're going to see the beginning of the space camp, expansions to Kerbin Station, and the demonstration of the Courier-class corvette in action. Thanks for watching.